Praise the Lord, everyone. My name is Sweta George, and I'm going to be sharing out of Psalm 49 today. This isn't a prayer or a praise song, but it is a sermon. The psalmist is teaching and admonishing us. Note the long introduction as the psalmist keeps us in suspense to impress upon us the gravity of the topic that he is about to teach. And he doesn't just address this to one particular group of people, but he calls everyone, the rich, the poor, the high, and the low. When you speak about riches, there is different wealth that we can talk about in what you do, in what you know, in who you are. And the least important is what you have, which is what the psalmist will address. In verses 5 to 6, he speaks about the trust versus possession. And he defines the rich not just as those with money, but those who trust in wealth and boast in the multitude of their riches. When you look at the biblical examples, you can see Abraham and King David. By today's standards, they would have been considered millionaires. However, because they were godly and trusted and boasted in the Lord, not in their assets. The point is, having money is not a sin, but making it your stronghold is. And making it an idolatry is the sin. He goes on to talk about the limits of this material wealth and what money cannot buy. In the spiritual world, money has zero currency. It cannot redeem a brother or give God ransom. The redemption of the soul is too costly for even silver or gold. There was a famous French atheist named Voltaire who was very wealthy and very popular. However, on his deathbed, he begged his doctor, "I will give you half of all that I possess if you will give me 6 more months to live." Sadly, he died in despair because wealth couldn't buy him a single breath. Like Solomon, the psalmist notes that the fool and the senseless perish and leave their wealth to others. You cannot take it with you. He goes on to talk about the destiny of the upright versus the fool in verses 13 to 15, and how in verse 14 he says that there's this ghastly picture of the rich being laid in the grave like a sheep, with death as their shepherd. Their beauty is consumed in the grave. However, in contrast, the upright shall have dominion over them in the morning. Those who did not make wealth their idol will be justified. In verse 15, he talks about the great hope that we have, and this is the hinge of the psalm. But God will redeem my life from the hand of Sheol. This foreshadows the hope that death cannot break the covenant bond between God and his people. And when you look at the verse 16 to 20, there's this practical application. And the tragedy of folly in verse 20. A person with riches but without understanding, which is God-centered wisdom, is like a beast, guided by instinct and ending in oblivion. So how do we gain this type of understanding? We can look to the history of the monks. We can challenge the poor monk myth. The oxymoron is we often think that the monk and finances don't mix. But the common misconception is that we assume that monks hate money or live in a financial barrenness. But the reality is that monks were often exceptional, nuanced, and very great biblical stewards. There are a few ideas that you can learn from them about sufficiency versus security, and the goal was to renounce the love of money, not money itself, and having enough to live and work without being a burden to others. It acknowledges our vulnerability and dependence on God. There's also this economic security that the delusion of stockpiling to feel invaluable. And this is the principle of grace. Money is a gift of grace. Trust in God's provision rather than chasing false assurances in bank accounts. The second idea is enough to be hospitable. The Antony model is the Saint Antony grew in his garden beyond what he could need, only so that he could feed guests. The purpose of accumulation was to work so that he didn't have to hoard, but enough to welcome others. This is the principle of koinonia, fellowship. Money is meant to be shared in community, ensuring that your surplus meets someone else's lack. The last idea is the economy of access. The monks practiced to consume less than they actually received. They would gather at the dinner table and they would take a piece of bread and put it in the middle so that there is enough for everyone to be fed. This is a principle of blessing. Creating margin turns into resources, into bountiful gift rather than the reluctant obligation. The heart of this monastic finance, and it shifts from fear to love. The monks' money management wasn't fueled by fear or insecurity or greed or access, but by love. The threefold result was grace, fellowship, and blessing. Wealth is a temporary tool. Understanding it is an eternal treasure. Don't be afraid when others get rich. They take nothing with them. Instead, focus on grace, fellowship, and blessing that comes from trusting in the Redeemer than the riches. God bless you.